Wow. Ugh. Any other objective truth seekers in the audience? Oh, yes. Come here. Come here. Nope, no more. Come on. Why is he so hesitant? Come on. Come on. Come on. Honey. I know you can do this. You're looking like you... Fine. Meow. 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 Sorry. Okay. Judge blasts government over mistakenly deporting Maryland man. Veteran DOJ attorney Erez Ruveni, who is listed in court documents as the active deputy director for the Office of Immigration Litigation, expressed his frustration in court Friday over the lack of information he had received from DOJ officials regarding Abrego Garcia's arrest and acknowledged he should not have been deported. Ruveni was placed on administrative leave by Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche over the weekend. Nice. He shouldn't have taken the case. He shouldn't have argued it if that's what he was going to do, she said. Nice. Hold on, I think a Warren guy's about to call. I think I'm just waiting for it.
There's chatter about President Trump seeking a third term. He has said, quote, there are methods. Is this just one of his epic trolls? Or does he or do you believe there is a method short of amending the Constitution by which he could seek a third term?
President Trump has served one full term. He's on his second full term. He's a very smart man, and I wish we could have him for 20 years as our president, but I think he's going to be finished probably after this term.
Probably.
Well, the Constitution, we'd have to look at the Constitution.
It would be a heavy lift, and whether you get two-thirds of the Senate and House to go along with you, but is the concession that that's really the only way to do it?
It'd be a heavy lift.
Okay, Attorney General, we thank you for your time. We hope you'll come back soon.
Thank you.
Okay, another headline.
Wow, hello, hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Let me...
Sure.
I'm just getting my OBS stuff set up. Hold on. Or the cameras set up. People can hear you though if you want to introduce yourself if you want.
Hello.
All right. Hold on. Okay. All right. And then you know I'm streaming, right? I said that?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. What's up? How you doing?
What's up? I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Okay. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You can start.
Okay. Okay. I'm a college dropout. Okay. I've never taken any formal philosophy. So when I'm asking this, I'm not trying to fucking lil bro or be an asshole. I'm just curious. Do you have any formal philosophy background at all?
Not in graduate school.
Oh.
There's required like media studies, and then they examine it through the lens of philosophers, but I wouldn't say I was specializing in philosophy.
Okay, cool. Just checking. All right. Okay. The one issue that I run into sometimes when I see people talk about certain issues is there's a phrase that will get tossed around sometimes, and it's this phrase, objective truth or objective scientific truth. And I feel like when people utter this phrase, the phrase is a lot stronger, I think, epistemically than some people realize, as in there's a lot of stuff being asserted there, and you don't need to assert that much stuff to have a particular argument. And I think that the ground that somebody is standing on is a lot less firm than they think when they assert that. And sometimes I feel like people will assert things and they'll call them like objective truths as a way to kind of like axiomatically brush over where legitimate disagreement can exist, as in somebody will say like, oh, well, I believe A, and someone will say, I believe B, and someone will go, well, actually, A is objective truth. And I was like, oh, well, in that case, I guess if you've defined it as such, then I guess it's over. And I guess that's my main frustration with phrases like when people bring up like objective truth, basically, and then we can branch off from there or launch from there, or you can say something if you want. Yeah.
No, I think that's fair. I don't disagree with any of that. And I think when I made that first kind of analysis of one of your responses, that's what intrigued me, was the pattern that I'm seeing, not necessarily with you, but with a lot of people that we're encountering today, where one person in the debate is making the claim that the fabric of reality, which is what I'm referring to with objective truth, we'll get into that with like biological truth and all that, but either being malleable or not existing. And there's a deeper kind of concern around that. So that's kind of what the lens I've been looking at it through, but keep going. Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said yet.
Sure. Okay. And then I agree that that's a thing that is concerning to a lot of people, that I think that when the obvious example, you've seen like The Matrix, right? Mm-hmm. That if you think that you're on very firm ground when it comes to reality, and then somebody challenges something that you'd consider like this is like beyond reproach, you can't challenge this thing, right? Like, is my whole world a fabrication that robots are putting in front of me, right? That kind of thing is deeply troublesome, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Now, obviously, I would make the argument that in some cases it's good to make those challenges, because it shows you that when I say you, I don't mean you. It shows a person that, oh, well, actually, this is a thing that you're taking for granted, and it could be a different way, which is always good to be aware of. And then in other ways, there are probably bad challenges here that people are doing for more heinous reasons, either intellectually dishonest ones that are just leading to, you could say, sophistry, like bad philosophical arguments, or they're doing it for political reasons because they just want to make certain political arguments. So an example of both might be, I'm not trying to politically charge anything one way or another, but somebody might say something like, oh, I think the Nazis were just pure evil. And somebody else might say, well, actually, the Nazis were normal humans like you and me, and it's good to understand what it would take to make somebody think something like that. Like, that would be kind of like challenging some notion that somebody has, where like, well, I could never be this thing. And it's like, well, maybe you could be. You could be a slave owner, you could have been a Nazi, you could have been who knows, right? That's a good challenge. And then maybe like a bad fact might be somebody saying like, oh, well, gay men are just like always going to be child molesters. And it's like, well, that fact, I don't know if that's so much as rooted as any sort of real observation or any sort of like good philosophical argument, more than it's just somebody's putting this forward because they obviously don't like gay people and they just want to be, you know, anti-gay for whatever reason. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree, because that's what's going to occur if we accept that whatever objective truth is beyond our reach. It's what we're striving for through science or objective understanding. It's not, we don't necessarily have it, but it is there regardless. It's what we're trying to map onto through knowledge. So there's definitely going to be the improvement of how we map onto that. So there's always room for a conversation. But that's different than sometimes when I'm encountering like Thaddeus Russell. I was messaging, I was like, that's the one that interests me the most, because he does that so hardcore, where it's not just, it's dismissing the idea that there is an objective truth even beyond our reach. If that makes sense.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so do you want to get into a particular, I guess, what was the name you just referenced there? What?
Thaddeus Russell. I did a video with him on Joe Rogan. We could dive into that. Let's keep going with this though, and kind of like consolidate whatever disagreement we have around that last video. That seems to be grounded in what we're talking about.
Sure. So I guess broadly speaking, there obviously this huge meme question. It was a meme online for a while, and then the Daily Wire did a thing off of it, the what is a woman thing. I think that when you're looking at gender or sex and you're looking for the contents of what those ideas are, I think when you talk about like ontology or like categories and the information, the content that they have, I think there's actually a ton of really fascinating questions that you can ask about like what a particular thing is. So an example of that might be a long time ago, there was a lake, and that lake contained something called water. And people had an understanding of what water was, of some properties of it, of some things you could do with it, that you needed it for nourishment, obviously. Well, now in the future, we might refer to water as H2O. We have a chemical formula for it. When we say water today, and we're knowingly referring to H2O, in the past, when we said water, and we were referring to a thing that might not have always been pure H2O, and we had no understanding of atomic physics or anything like that at all, or chemistry or anything like that at all, are we referring to the same thing, or are we referring to different abstractions of a thing? I think that's a deeply interesting question. It gets into some like really interesting areas of ontology or metaphysics. And I think that when it comes to gender and sex, I think that similar questions can be asked, such as like when you say like a man or a woman, you define it by like chromosomes or whatever. That could be a way that you define it. But if you go back 1,000 years, nobody knew what a chromosome was, but we still had this identity of like man and woman. And so are we referring to the same thing? Were we just slightly less correct before, and now we're more correct? Or have we refined our definition in a way that's changed it? Yeah, I don't know. I think all these things are worth discussing. I think there's two huge issues sometimes that pops up. One is I think that there are people that confuse, and I feel like I think I would probably charge you with this. I think sometimes people will view something as being a social construct, or people will view something as being like a human-created, mind-dependent category, and they'll confuse that with it being arbitrary or worthless, just like whatever. So like I would argue, for instance, that like the universal category of sex, that is a mind-dependent thing, that if every human being were wiped out on the planet, the category of sex wouldn't exist, but the underlying content of it would still exist. So you'd still have like things that we call males, things that we call females, like you'd still have dicks and vaginas and things that reproduce in a certain way. Yeah.
Well,
Although I will say, just as a real quick, as a real quick thing on the second thing, there are people though, they're not as common anymore, but there are people who do use it in an arbitrary manner where they'll say something like, oh, well, a man or a woman can be literally anything. Or like the entire concept of, for instance, of self-ID, you are what you identify as, is literally self-defeating and stupid, because then anybody could be anything this time. So there are some people that use it in a bad way, but then I think sometimes the response to that is a little bit too aggressive in the other direction, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the semantic level of how we're mapping onto that objective truth. So you're absolutely right that language is a social construct. It's how we are, what we've agreed upon to reflect that objective truth, which requires that objective truth to exist. So yeah, we could, the argument that, well, woman, it's a term we made up, okay, but the underlying what we're mapping onto, which is what we refer to as the biological, when we say the biological truth of what we agreed upon, that what does that represent? It's biologically. So
yeah, so I don't think I necessarily disagree with that per se. I think it only bothers me. I guess I'm kind of repeating myself. Is that whenever somebody entertains this conversation, it feels like sometimes there's a group of people that think they can shut it down very quickly and easily by saying something like the most common thing I hear is when somebody's like, oh, what is a woman? Somebody says, oh, well, it's an adult human female. And it's like, okay, well, if you're using female to define woman, I feel like we're in the land of tautology at this point. Like, you're defining a thing with a synonym. It doesn't seem like it's doing a very good job at that. Not to say that like, well, a woman or a man could be anything. I feel like sometimes it's a shortcut. And then when I see certain people discussing a topic, it feels like the topic is being held hostage by politics or social prescription rather than under kind of like underlying, I guess, analysis or understanding of any kind of truthful statement, I guess. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Sure, there's definitely the potential for that. I'm trying to think the example. I was trying to remember the example that you used in that conversation with the we're disproving the rule because there's an exception.
Oh, I don't believe that. I think that's really dumb. I don't.
Okay.
Oh no, wait. Oh wait, I don't think so. I'm sorry. So there was a smaller kid there who I think was literally 16. I don't buy into all of his ideas. So some rules can be disproven by exceptions, and other rules, an exception never proves a rule. I don't know where that idea came from, unless there's some logic that I'm unfamiliar with. But there can be some rules that can be disproven by exceptions. And I think that kid might have given an example of one. So if I say, for instance, we're working in a binary system and I see the number 2 pop up, well, we're not in binary anymore. Something else must be happening, right? So that would break that rule.
Yeah, that's a more accurate analogy than what he was saying. So like if we were to say human beings are born with 5 fingers, well, some people are born without 5 fingers, but biologically speaking, is it accurate? Is it valid to say human beings have 5 fingers, even though there's not the potential for that? The other one that you used that was interesting was if a woman has spikes on her hand. And I get the analogy there, but it's still, that analogy is claiming that, okay, we can use common sense to dissect these social conversations, but the problem is that the analogy is that these biological spikes are what's causing the unfair. It's so common sense. We could see these spikes would make it so that it wouldn't be fair for them to compete, but that's mapping onto what immutable characteristics born through biology still. So it's still going back to biology.
Yeah, it is. I just think it's good to analyze sometimes, like when we look at women's sports, like what's the point of the category? It seems like the point of the category is that there is a group of people that we want to have athletic representation for, and therefore we've created this category called women's sports. We do it for small people as well. It's called weight classes, right? So we have like different, and there's different types of like fighting and everything depending on the weight class, but like we have weight classes as well to protect certain heights of people or body builds or weights of people as well. And I think the issue that I come into a lot when it comes to, so I'll warn you that I'm probably an outsider here, so I don't think any other progressive would ever say this because for whatever fucking reason. So personally, I don't think it matters about the quote unquote fairness in terms of should trans people be allowed to compete in a sport. I think it's more just like, well, we have to analyze why the category is created, and would letting a trans person compete in the category like destroy the reason for that category? And so in my opinion, the answer is yes. If you have a category created to protect cisgender women who wouldn't be able to compete with somebody with a I guess a male biology, then allowing trans women to compete there seems to break that the same way that a woman with spikes for hands would probably break that. So you probably just wouldn't have that person competing because it would break the category. But like my analysis can start and stop there without me having to moralize, like, am I attacking all of like biology or my fundamental understanding of the universe or anything like that. That's what I meant when I said like we can engage in the analysis and do like I think like a good faith pursuit of these underlying categories without having to like morally load or normatively load every single statement we make. I think, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. The challenge, it's a bit more complicated, I think, because we can't necessarily identify why the classifications exist. It's also for the sake of the competition. So boxing, they divide men into different weight classes, safety. There's going to be multiple reasons, so it doesn't reduce down to a singular reason. That would be my only response to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. There's going to be a multiple amount of reasons, but it's important to understand what those reasons are, because none of those reasons have anything to do with self-ID. Like none of those reasons have anything.
But regardless of those reasons, we can still, if the change introduces safety hazards, mm-hmm. Even if that doesn't correlate to, we were separating them by weight class for the sake of competition as well. If we're suddenly introducing this complication, I don't think it necessarily has to map onto the category. We could recognize, like, with your spike analogy.
I was agreeing with you. I'm saying that, like, if we say that we've created this category for women, we didn't create it just to have it so that whatever IDs as a woman is suddenly allowed to compete, right? It's like that, have you ever seen the movie Air Bud?
A long time ago.
Like a dog can't play basketball. You couldn't put like a zebra in the court and be like, oh, well, look, the zebra identifies as a woman, so now they can play. Right? Obviously, there's breaks. This is dumb. Right. So, yeah, I think understanding where the categories are from, why they're created, and what it works as. And we can think of like real life things too. Even like I'm sure there's like a disease that causes you to mature incredibly fast. We probably wouldn't let this person compete in like grade school or high school sports either. If it was a 9-year-old with the physiology of like an 18-year-old, we would say this is not. Or if you get held back, 5 years, we're not going to have a 19-year-old dunking on 13 or 14-year-olds,
Sure. Yeah. I don't see a problem with that.
Okay. Yeah. Wait, what else? Did you have any other things in particular, or?
I didn't see I know you did some response video. I haven't seen it. So if there's anything in there that you think I misrepresented or I oversimplified.
I'm curious, when you say like objective scientific truth, can you describe, like, give me some understanding of what you mean when you say that statement?
Yeah. It's that separate from us that we're striving for, that exists independent of any social construct. It's what we would say science, mathematics is trying to understand. Simple as that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. I'll rephrase it slightly, and I think we're on the same page. So we can say some things are like mind dependent, like Harry Potter doesn't exist if all humans are dead, right?
Sure.
And then there are some things that are probably going to exist, hopefully, even if every single human is wiped out. So like a book with Harry Potter, the story in it, or a book that will exist even if every human being is wiped out. There's some underlying matter there that exists regardless of any humans to observe it or organize it, right?
Right. Someone left an interesting comment on that video claiming that when you say truth, you're talking it's more semantic in exchanges, and they use the example of, if we're playing catch, is it true to say that they're throwing the ball back and forth and they're playing catch? And the problem I think we run into is that, I mean, we've seen debates. Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson debated just the word truth for like 2 hours. So to simplify that down, because an arrow can fly true, a statement can be true, but so when we're talking about objective truth, I think we're getting closer to like biological truth. So the problem is, this gets into a semantic conversation, but as long as we kind of understand what we're laying out here.
Yeah. So I would argue that, so philosophy and psychology run into this issue where they use a lot of the same words that we use in common parlance. A really great example of this is like depression, right? Like having major depressive disorder is significantly different than just feeling depressed. Or, a true statement is a lot different than in epistemology, like having a theory of truth, like justified true belief or some other kind of like theory of truth. So I think the semantic part is important to declare the boundaries of like, what is the conversation about,
Yeah, I would say that in that example, I don't think that would be objectively true, saying this psychological condition is worse, because to some people it might be worse, it might not be. It might be a valid statement. So that video with the student with J.K. Rowling, I wouldn't even claim that it's true that J.K. Rowling is not transphobic. It's more, is that a valid conclusion based upon the evidence that you can provide? But it's not objectively true because I can't account for everything that she's said. Does that make sense?
It's kind of true. True. So I think the issue there, like there are different types of truths that we can talk about.
Yeah.
So like, for example, it's kind of funny when you talk about like defamation law and everything, you get into some of this as well, right? If I say like Warren punched me in the face, like that's a statement that you could take me to court for if you hadn't punched me in the face, because I'm defaming you, I'm lying. It's an actionable statement. It's something that clearly reduces to a true or false. It can be clearly observed in the universe. But if I were to say something like Warren is a huge, big, meanie asshole, right? You can never take me to court for that because it's an opinion, right? You can't prove that one way or another. I'm allowed to have that opinion. But I think there are different types of truths, and in 99% of human conversation, this doesn't matter because people will automatically intuit what the context is. But it gets harder when we start to bring in philosophy, because now we're, again, like I said, we're trying to invoke much firmer ground than what we're actually standing on. And sometimes these truths can be quite different from each other. So, for instance, when we say the difference between like a truth in physics or chemistry and a truth in math, I would say that these are significantly different types of truths. So, for instance, math is a system that is built on, if I say axiom, do you know what an axiom is? Basically,
being premised within a logical argument. Kind
of, yeah. An axiom is a statement. I wouldn't say necessarily premise, because a premise could be wrong, but in a way it is. Yeah, it's a statement that's asserted as true, and you can't attack it. You just start with that axiom, right? But starting with that axiom, and all of math, I think the current set of axioms, I think comes from its set theory. The abbreviation is ZFC. It's like Zermelo-Francus set theory or some bullshit. But all of math is constructed off of axioms. So when we say a mathematical statement is true or false, what we're really saying is it's true or false insofar as it comports with our mathematical axiomatic truths. Now,
our knowledge.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even necessarily say knowledge. I would just say that if I construct a theory that says A equals 1 and B equals 2 and C equals 3, then if I say A plus B equals C, that's an objectively true, the strongest type of true statement that could ever be made. But does it say anything about reality? I mean, it could. I could try to make it say something about reality, but that statement is a lot different than saying that hydrogen is a single electron, proton, neutron atom or whatever, right? These are, I think they're getting at different types of things. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. All that to say that when somebody says, so for instance, somebody is transphobic, especially when you're arguing with progressives, probably the more important thing there isn't to argue over the body of evidence or whatever, but it's usually to find out what does somebody mean when somebody says somebody is transphobic. Because for a lot of people, somebody will say, if you don't think that trans women and cis women can compete at every level of athletics together in all places, if you don't believe that, then you're transphobic. Well, in that case, then you probably agree with the person insofar as their definition is concerned. You're like, okay, I guess J.K. Rowling is transphobic. There's probably a whole bunch of transphobic people. But then the argument there isn't over whether or not the person is transphobic. The argument should be over the definition of their word of transphobic or whether or not they've defined it correctly, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. In Aristotelian, what you're referring to sounds like Aristotelian logic, whereas statements can be true, but the argument in which those statements occur, the axioms, are invalid. Which is, so you make an important point there. I get what you mean.
Mm-hmm. The only reason I bring this up again is because as soon as philosophy is invoked, we can get into areas where, because there are things that you say in your videos where if you were just using softer language, and I don't mean soft as in nice, but if you were to say something so for trans women competing with cis women in sports, you can have whatever social feeling you want about equity and inclusion and all of that, but that doesn't change the fact of the matter that a trans woman who's gone through a male puberty will always be conferred certain biological advantages. And that's going to be true almost universally no matter what. And that's a statement that is very, very, very hard to disagree with, almost impossible to disagree with. But
I don't think I said that.
Kind of, but there's a slight difference when you say something that you can't escape the biological truth that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's an objective scientific truth. When we say things like objective scientific truth, I think we're invoking huge bodies of philosophy. It's almost like importing a library. We're bringing in way more powerful statements, I think. That's where I start to have an issue with it. And it might not be an issue for you only doing that, but then the issue will carry over to, let's say somebody's having a debate or an argument over, well, what is a man or what is a woman or what defines the difference between these two. Well, somebody will take that same argument before and go, oh, well, it's objective scientific truth that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. It's like, well, hold on, you're just defining it with itself. And now we can't have that conversation because we've been so semantically kind of mixed up before.
Right, we're moving back into the semantics of it, but I would argue that it doesn't reflect at all upon the objective truth itself, objective reality, which is what we're trying to map onto. And if you can provide a better mapping of how to map onto that, then go for it. But when we're talking about biology, something like Richard Dawkins, that is the best explanation we have been able to. I mean, that's the reason he describes the poetry of reality. That's what he's interested in through biology.
Yeah, and I would hope that most scientists are trying to model some aspect of reality. It's typically what we do with science because the better we understand it, the better we can manipulate it. It's just frustrating when that vocabulary then gets weaponized in other areas where it might not necessarily be as important. So, for instance, men and women or trans women and women, say, showering together or having some shared bathroom or whatever. Well, in this arena, it might be a different consideration that we make than we would make it in an athletic arena, to where I would say that there are strong arguments in athletic arenas to not have trans women and cis women competing with each other. But I would say when it comes to bathrooms, I think there are strong arguments in exactly the opposite direction. They would probably be less socially unnerving to have Blair White go into a woman's restroom, even though she's a trans woman, as opposed to having Buck Angel go into a woman's restroom, even though he's a trans man. Yeah. But if somebody were to invoke like the objective scientific truth semantic, and they were to bring that over to the bathroom one, well, now that conversation is being held hostage by the incredibly strong language used in the other argument. I guess is my issue. Yeah.
It could. And moving into that sort of debate, the problem I'm seeing, and I try and take it, the problem I'm seeing is that tomorrow, if I can decide that I'm a woman, and now, I guess it would be under the law, if I am now treated as a woman in all these spaces, because you're talking about differentiating bathroom spaces from the showering spaces or whatnot, the problem is that how are we going to approach that through the level of policy? Because where the rubber meets the road is the policy, which I would guess how we legally approach this. So if I tomorrow I'm a woman and now I have access to all these spaces and you can't feel uncomfortable, you can't question that, you can't tell me to leave. And that's the problem that I haven't heard anyone address when I have these debates.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a huge problem. But I think that it just has to start from a better like semantic ground where like everybody's using a very clear understanding of the words. And I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm literally permabanned from Twitch over trans-related sports stuff. So I mean, like, I'm obviously sympathetic towards these arguments here. It's just when we invent new things or when we have more like fleshed out ways of understanding things, then our definitions just slightly change over time. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So for instance, our definition of man or woman now is going to have more content than the definitions that people might have used a long time ago. For instance, we can identify things like chromosomes. We never could have identified those before. We can imagine a world, it might sound kind of silly, but like earlier we spoke about weight classes for boxing. Right. Well, what happens if Elon Musk, gets everything he wants and we actually do build a civilization on Mars? OK, and on Mars, the gravity is, I think it's a little bit weaker than Earth. Well, if we had boxers going between Mars and Earth, well, now when we talk about weight classes, we would have an extra qualifier. We'd say the weight class is this many pounds on Earth or this many pounds on Mars. We wouldn't be able to use the same weight class for both because it'd be slightly different depending on which planet they were on. It's kind of a goofy example, but like same thing when it comes to like bathrooms or locker rooms. Well, now if we're considering trans people, we just have to go back and understand why do we have this category? Why do we have this separation? And is the separation still served by the two categories? So in the example of weight, having a 100 pound or 200 pound, like a 100 pound featherweight class, that's not served well if you can weigh different amounts on different planets, right? So we would have to clarify, well, hold on, we mean Earth weight versus Martian weight. And then same thing with the trans stuff. If we have like showers for trans women and cis women, well, are the bathrooms served well by having all women, including trans women there? Yeah, sure, they probably are. But what about like for sports? Here, probably not. So we do need the distinction of trans women versus cis women here, if that makes sense.
Yes, I mean, but when you're talking about how to organize sports on Mars, given the gravity difference, I think that's separate from the ramifications of, again, if tomorrow anyone can decide that they're a woman, there's no escaping that in the landscape that we're being presented right now. These problems are still going to occur. You could talk about how they're enforced around bathrooms as opposed to sports and everything, but that's not getting at I guess it's just a different way of viewing the issue.
Well, so like the argument that you just brought up there, in my opinion, so you didn't say anything about like objective scientific truth or anything like that, but without even saying that, I think that argument there you made was a very strong argument for why you can't have things like self-ID. It doesn't make sense to create a distinction if anybody can ID into the distinction. Like definitionally, that's stupid, right? Like if I say that, like, yeah, exactly. So like, I think that's a strong argument against self-ID inclusion in what is definitionally an exclusionary category. So if we have sports for cis women or sports for women, it wouldn't make sense to have sports for women as a protected category if anybody can ID as a woman. And I think that argument right there, I think that on its own is a defeater for somebody simply saying that self-ID is a valid way to enter a woman's category of sports, right?
Sure, it might be a better way to argue the point, but it doesn't remove objective reality. Is my only point.
Yeah, I agree. But it's just I think the important thing is just identifying like what is the important, I guess, facet of objective reality that we're trying to talk about. And I don't think it has much to do with, I don't think it necessarily has to do, let me think about this for a second. The issue is that sometimes I think that arguments can be more complicated than they need to be, and I don't think we even have to invoke anything about objective reality, because the problem is the deeper you go epistemically, the more disagreements you could run into, but it's totally possible that there are disagreements that you never actually have to resolve because you can agree on some things otherwise, right? So, like, for instance, people can be different religions, but believe, like, in different things about legal systems, right? Like, I think it's immoral to, commit adultery, but I don't think it should be, like, illegal or something, right? You can have, like, that agreement, Okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sure, but if I say tomorrow I've decided to be a woman, the response would be, well, okay, well, what do you mean? Is that if I say, well, I am a woman, I mean, the question is, do you mean biologically? And so now it can pivot into objective reality very quickly. I guess that.
Or even, can I say, like, even when you say that,
Sure.
so if somebody were to say that, if somebody were to say, I identify as a woman biologically, I think that belief would be worth interrogating. Because then you could ask somebody, well, when you say, because
Yes.
even if you follow that line of argumentation, there's a defeater for it based on how people call it like semantics, like it doesn't matter, but semantics are incredibly important. So running down this real quick, somebody would say, oh, I identify as a woman. You're like, hold on, you can identify biologically as a woman? They go, yes, actually, biologically I think I'm a woman. Oh, okay. Well, if you identify biologically as a woman, if we look at the category of women's sports, why do you think that category exists? Is it just for people that identify as a woman biologically, or do you think that category is supposed to invoke something more? If they say it's just for people that identify as a woman, then the obvious like joker defeater is like, okay, well, tomorrow The Rock IDs as a woman. Would you allow him to compete in women's sports? If they say yes, I mean, like it's absurd. Then you just ignore them, you blow them off because this is dumb, right? But the person is eventually going to decide, like, okay, fine. If I want to say that I identify as something biologically, fine, whatever. But the way I'm using biologically there is different than how basically everybody else uses biologically, and I'm probably better suited to use a different word. Like you can argue there that your semantic distinction here is very poor. You shouldn't be using the term biologically here because now you're standing in opposition to how everybody else in society uses biologically, I would say.
Sure, I would say it's an invalid argument because I cannot identify biologically. My biology is independent of how I identify. So therefore, it's not a valid statement to make. You could say my gender identity is different. The problem is we're now making that leap and claiming that you can I won't say that. That would be that it seems.
The line. So this line of dialogue that you're on, I think is infinitely stronger than just saying like objective scientific truth. When you start saying things like you can't self-ID biologically, there's no category that exists like that, save for categories that are created especially to self-ID, like a name. Some people say, well, you can ID as whatever name you want. Okay, sure, but definitionally, names are just things we call ourselves. But you logically defeat a category by saying anybody can identify as the category. There has to be content to the category. You can't just say, I am a thing, and now you suddenly are the thing. Because if that was true, then the thing itself would be meaningless, right? I think those are super strong arguments, and I think they're a huge defeater for any like self-ID argument, I would say.
I agree with you there. Yeah. I mean, I did that video on Professor Dave. Like, I'm genuinely trying to follow along, and I get what he's saying. Where we separate sex first from gender, but then we switch gender to gender identity. The problem is that gender identity, it's no longer you are a trans woman. No, it's now that you are a woman. So and people ask me, what do you mean people are trying to change the fabric of reality? Where is that occurring? And when it comes to that position, I would say, well, right there. Yeah.
So I think that, okay, so let me summarize your argument so I'm understanding your argument. So you're saying that your issue with him is he's drawing a distinction initially between biological sex and gender identity. Then he's saying that your gender identity can be man or woman. And then he's saying, therefore, if a person identifies as man or woman, they can be referred to as man or woman. And you feel like it's making the boundaries between the sex-gender distinction more hazy than they should be, basically?
I think his argument is going to lead to inevitable problems when we don't allow for that third category to exist, trans man, trans woman, but now we're making it no, they are a woman, and some people are even claiming like biologically not everyone's going to do that. So don't be surprised when people like J.K. Rowling are going to push back on that idea. And there's a lot of other problems that stem out of this. We had the changing room, the mother with the 6-year-old. Does she have a choice in what occurs around that 6-year-old? That's my only.
Yeah. So I would.
Yeah, that's how I would respond to that. It's.
Mm-hmm. I would caution the other person. I guess it would be, in this case, is it Professor Dave, in making like a forward movement here. So I would say that, like, for instance, the category distinction of like, we can agree there's some difference. There must be some difference between trans woman and cis woman. I think we both agree with that, right? Obviously there is. I think everybody in reality would agree with that. There's some distinction between trans woman and cis woman. However,
according to their definitions, yeah.
Yeah. However, in ordinary society, we typically would just identify somebody as a woman or a man, because we don't have enough information to come to the conclusion of if they're cis or trans, right? Like, we're not genital checking or chromosome checking everybody, right? So, like, in that case, if somebody was arguing that in terms of social distinctions, we would probably just call trans women women and trans men men, because that's just typically how we ID each other, through how we look at each other and everything. I think that's okay. But then I would agree with you here, and it's an argument I get into with I used to get into with a lot of like super progressive people. You just have to be careful that you don't take this argument, because now when you're starting to blur the line between your biological underlying, what you would call biological objective truth, I would refer to like your underlying content of what fills the category of man and woman biologically. If you start to blur those boundaries, you start to get into ridiculous worlds where, like, trans women on Twitter are, tweeting that they're having periods and stuff. And it's like, this is fucking retarded. And something is obviously not correct here. Yeah.
Another interesting point around Professor Dave's is that his argument was that this is grounded in biology, that you can scan the brain. I'm trying to make sure I understand this correctly, but then I've had different responses claiming that was proven invalid. So I'm not quite sure what to think on this. So if anyone has any additional information, but his claim is that you can scan the brain of someone who identifies differently, and you will see that literally physically in the buyout. Therefore, it's grounded in biology.
Well, so
but obviously, in some cases, possibly.
I would be careful about any statements about grounded in biology, because necessarily, as biological beings, literally every single thing, arguably, depending on if you're an epistemic anti-realist or not, right, arguably, even like logical, anything is grounded in biology, because as humans, we're the ones who have invented things like logic, right, technically. So I would be very careful if somebody makes the argument that this is grounded in biology. You can say literally everything. Schizophrenia is grounded in biology. Everything is grounded in biology. We're humans, right? Unless you're getting this from literally God or something. I
agree with you. That's a danger of taking that position. I agree. I think there is a distinction from psychology and neuroscience.
Sure, yeah. As far as I'm aware, the truth statement of like, are trans brains different than cis brains? I feel like there's one paper that argued there's like a slight difference in size, but I don't think there's like very strong or compelling arguments here yet. So I don't think that's like the strongest, but usually when people wheel out that like these people don't understand biology because they don't believe in trans people, usually what that person is, going to make a bunch of silly-ish arguments, I think, or they're going to make really good ones about how scientific categories are all technically created as well. But that's a different type of argument, I guess. But
See, that's where my alarm bell goes off. It's like, well, the language we use to map onto that objective truth, it's science, which is what. Sure, the categories are the best we've been able to come up with, but that doesn't refute that there is objective truth, which we're striving to articulate.
Hopefully we're striving to it, right? So without getting like without getting too weird or out there, right? So you have this domain of philosophy called ethics, okay? So normative statements, moral statements, things that are good or bad, right? Some people would argue, and I'm warm to this argument, that ethical distinctions actually precede truthful statements. And the argument would be that any statement that you've decided to evaluate you've already made a decision on whether or not the results will be useful to you or not. That truth is actually, we take an instrumentalist approach to it, meaning we value truth only insofar as it can give us things that make our lives better or that we can utilize in some way. But if we can't, we won't. So, for instance, if we look at any scientific investigation, they're never done at random. They're usually pushing in a direction that we feel can benefit us in some way, generally speaking. The reason why I say all of this is because the dangers of using statements like objective scientific truth, even when it comes to things like biology, is in the past, have you ever heard of like phrenology?
No.
So like phrenology was, I think, the concept that like the Negro skull had certain indents that made them like naturally more in servitude to like white men or something, and that like if you were to kill a black person and you were to check the indents in their skull, that there was like a whole science constructed around like saying like black people are built to be slaves or whatever. And all of the science built around phrenology probably wasn't a pursuit of the truth per se. It was a pursuit of something that was furthering the ends of obviously people that had an investment in that. Or have you ever heard of like Lysenkoism?
And what disproved that? Did objective truth disprove that?
Well, no, it was other scientific investigators disproved it, hopefully because, as you're saying, like it wasn't true.
Right.
The underlying content wasn't true. Yeah.
Right.
But there was a time period where everybody believed in, or a lot of people believed in phrenology. Or have you heard of like Lysenkoism?
No.
I might not have 100% correct, but the Soviet Union, for whatever reason, the guy that was in charge of a lot of their agriculture stuff, I think Lysenko, I don't know if it's because he viewed it as like Western science. He didn't believe in either genes or cells. I think it was genes. He didn't believe in genes. So they didn't believe that you could like crossbreed like hybrid crops or anything like that. He just didn't believe in it at all. And it was called Lysenkoism, and it dominated Soviet thought around agriculture for a while. But like that thought didn't necessarily come from his belief in pursuing objective truth. It's because he was probably he probably thought he was pursuing objective truth, which is always the scary thing, right? But there were probably other value statements that were driving his decision making there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In an ideal world, go ahead.
Well, I mean, people, you make good. That certainly can occur. Where I would be careful is I made a video exploring this idea where Neil deGrasse Tyson sitting down with Shapiro. I think you talked about that one briefly.
Yeah, I think so.
That's what I was trying to point out, is where he starts questioning simply making an objective observation, meaning an observation about something which we do understand to be objective truth. We are in agreement upon that. He's like, well, how does that fact, I think that's what sparked this whole thing, was my comment on that. How does that fit into the larger story which you are wielding? Mm-hmm. And Shapiro's response is, why does that matter? Is it not enough to observe something that is objectively true?
I think that, so I'm giving Neil deGrasse Tyson a bit of credit here because I haven't ever heard him say anything like completely outlandish, although he's definitely a little tip-tippy sometimes. But I haven't heard him say anything like completely insane. But I would say that if I remember the conversation, the gist of it is just, it's similar to what I'm saying, in that like people just need to be a lot more careful about how firm the epistemic ground they're on is, because it can be a lot more shaky sometimes than they realize. Even if there are things you can observe that feel like, oh, this is just a fundamentally, absolutely true thing. This will never be disproved. This is just so true. Like, it's just obviously true. But there might be a statement to where there might be a society that says 1 + 1 = 3. And you might analyze this all day. You can take all of your mathematicians back and you go, okay, well, 1 + 1 = 3. Maybe they define some ones differently than other ones, or maybe they've it's just a thing that it just doesn't make sense, or maybe the society's irrational, and you try to tell them that like, oh, okay, well, we're going to come here, we're going to brain zap all of you and make you understand that 1 + 1 can never equal 3. That's not true. And then you make all of them understand that, and then the whole herd dies out, in 2 generations. It's like, well, what happened? And well, their understanding of 1 + 1 = 3 before was that if you take like a male and a female of an animal and you put them together, they'll have a kid, and their whole society was built around like shepherding or whatever. So in that sense, they're like, okay, 1 and 1 is 3 always, because you always get a new kid. It seems like a silly thing, but there are a lot of like really fundamental things that we just say these are objectively absolutely true. And it's like, well, when you sit and actually interrogate those beliefs, they're not as 100%. They could be different. Now, this isn't to say that like, oh, like everything we know is wrong and men and women can be the same and blah, blah, blah. It's just that we can't take for granted, I guess, the ground we're standing on when we're making true or false statements, or saying things like objective scientific truth. Because a lot of people have thought that throughout history, that were statements that turned out to be absolutely not true, right?
That's fair. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah. Did you watch that long conversation with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson?
Oh, I did. It's been a while, though.
It was so obviously I fucking hate Jordan Peterson and I love Sam Harris, obviously. But if you watch that conversation, this is way before Jordan Peterson went fucking crazy. And I think that Jordan Peterson performed much better in that conversation. And the whole issue, it's funny, if I remember correctly, it's basically a rehash of the conversation we're having now, where Sam Harris, I think, he's got this book called The Moral Landscape, where at one point in time he felt that he'd married the ideas of prescription and description, that you could get a moral ought from a collection of descriptive facts, which most people agree that you can't do. But every time Sam Harris would say like, oh, well, we're creating like a moral landscape that's better, Jordan Peterson would go, well, what do you mean by better? And it's a good question. And it seems obvious. Well, what is better? Obviously, we're happier, healthier. Well, is that obvious? Like in all points in human history that we haven't always agreed. There are some things we agree on, but we haven't always agreed on what that means in every single category. So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation to watch. And I think Jordan Peterson actually does make a lot of really good points in that conversation. But yeah.
I'll check it out.
But it's very boring and it'll be a very like philosophy heavy semantic bullshit type conversation. It's very much into that. But yeah, it's Harris getting frustrated because Sam Harris just wants to say, can't we just fucking assume? What he really wants to do is he wants to say, can't we just fucking assume this? But you can't, not really. You can't really actually just assume it, yeah, because it takes all the hard part out of it.
Yeah, I was just listening to Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins yesterday. That's probably the most painful one I've seen with him.
Is it, how recent is that conversation?
I think it was 2 years ago. The first one I heard, it was only audio. I think they were at Oxford, and so there was no camera. And oh man, I would say it's his poorest one, but they're just coming at it initially when I think when I messaged it to you, I was like, I think we're just interested in different things, kind of coming at this in different ways. Like I wouldn't consider myself a political expert or debater at all, but and they're just coming at it from completely, because Richard Dawkins is very much grounded, like we were talking about the poetry of reality, that's his saying, and he's very much simply about the pursuit of objective truth, and Peterson brings in the archetypes and stories, and the two just collide.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would have to see it. If it's going to be recent Peterson, I'm probably going to think he's a little bit crazy. However,
you'll think he was crazy in this.
Sure, maybe. I will say that like I'm a huge atheist. Like I very much appreciate, like non-spiritual answers and distinctions for things like that. But like I do think there's this term called scientism, and I super believe in this, that sometimes people, in their pursuit of being like non-spiritual or in their pursuit of being like woo-woo or whatever, they end up in this world where they think that they're like, oh, everything is going to be about this just objective scientific truth, and I'm not going to use like gay shit like emotion or social constructs or whatever. I'm just going to stick in this subjective world. And as a subjective being, you kind of like what you said in the beginning, you actually don't even have access to that world, arguably, right? Well, we can't even access the world outside of our subjective understanding. Imagine humans didn't have ears and an alien creature comes and tries to describe music, right? Like we can't even perceive like differences in vibrations in the air. How could we even understand something like that, right? We just happen to have the sensory inputs for it, but there could be whole other sensory inputs that we're missing. It's possible, it's conceivable, yeah. So somebody like Dawkins, I might even disagree with more than Peterson, even if Peterson doesn't argue it well, just because some people are, too eager to like say everything is grounded in absolute fact that we can have access to at all points in time. And it's like, oh. No.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean with that. I think he does miss some points that Peterson's trying to lay out with, but the flaw was more, and he's just too long-winded in that exchange, where he's like he gets overly enthusiastic. He's in ayahuasca and blah blah blah. And Dawkins is like, look, man, just like that's when the one where he first said you're drunk on symbols. There was a later one moderated by Alex O'Connor, but this was the first one. But I think you make a very good point there that I agree with. Yeah.
Okay. Any other things?
No, not at the moment. I just wanted to chat with you, and sorry if I misrepresented anything. I hope I didn't, but
you're good. Listen, online conversations are always brutal. I never take offense to anything that shows up in a video. As long as you don't take offense to anything that shows up in a video, it is what it is.
Go for it. Make whatever you want. Well, cool, Destiny. I don't want to eat up your time, but just message me if you ever want to do it again.
Yeah, cool. All right, thanks. I appreciate the conversation, really. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. See you.
Bye. Okay, well. somebody messaged me, and I've heard this before, but I hope it's not true because it's so dumb, that when somebody says, well, the exception proves the rule, do people don't mean that as in, they just mean that like, well, if you're saying there's an exception to what? To a rule, LOL. I'm not accusing Warren of doing that, but is that what that means when people say the exception proves the rule? That's not what they mean, is it? Because that would be so silly. No, they absolutely use it like that. It's that dumb. Oh, okay. Also, I'm not accusing Warren of doing that. I'm just. Did you take a peek at Athlon Optics? I haven't looked at anything, my dude. I ordered that Geisler gun, and then yeah. I think too much brain power goes into what is a woman when we need to talk about why men aren't allowed into bathrooms. What, at all? Have you looked into the hands-off protests? The ones about Trump yesterday, supposedly they were really huge. Like there were a ton of people. Jesus, and